There is a moment, and if you are here tonight, you already know it. You have already lived it. Perhaps you are living it right now. There is a moment when the person you built yourself to be simply stops working. The smile that used to open doors now feels like a mask stitched to your face with thread that has worn thin. The strength you performed for everyone else becomes a costume you can no longer find the zipper on. You wake up one ordinary morning, and the person who has been getting you through, the good one, the strong one, the one who never asks for help, the one who absorbs everyone else's pain so they don't have to carry it alone. That person looks back at you from the mirror like a stranger wearing your clothes, and something inside you, something old and something patient, finally says, "No more. This is not a breakdown. Write that down if you need to. This is not the end of you. This is the oldest story the human soul knows how to tell. A death before a birth, a dissolving before a becoming." And if you have ever wondered why the people who suffered the most, the ones who were not protected when they should have been, who learned too early how to read a room for danger, who became fluent in other people's pain because their own was never safe to speak, if you have ever wondered why those people, when they finally survive themselves, become the deepest wells of strength this world has ever seen, then you are asking the right question tonight, and I intend to answer it. Let us begin honestly, because nothing false will survive where we are going. Every child who grows up in a home where love was conditional, where safety was unpredictable, where the adults around them were too wounded themselves to see the small person in front of them, every one of those children learns very quickly a survival art. They learn to feel outward before they are permitted to feel inward. They learn to scan a face for the weather of the room. Is he angry? Is she about to leave? Is the silence dangerous, or is it only tired? They become, without ever choosing it, an instrument tuned to other people's frequencies. We give this instrument many names later in life: sensitivity, intuition, being too much, being the strong one. But underneath all of the names is a simple, devastating fact. The child never got to ask what they were feeling because they were too busy managing what everyone else was feeling. And so a self was built, not a true self, a managing self, a watchman self, a self whose entire architecture was constructed around one silent, desperate question: how do I keep everyone around me calm enough that I remain safe? That watchman self is brilliant. Do not mistake me. It is a masterpiece of the human psyche, built under conditions no child should have had to build anything under. It kept you alive. It got you through hallways that should never have felt like minefields. It read your mother's mood before she spoke. It knew, before your father raised his voice, that the raising was coming. But here is the truth that no one told you, and that I am telling you now, plainly, because you have waited long enough to hear it. A self built for survival is not the same as a self built for living. And the day comes, it always comes, when survival is no longer the task at hand, and yet the watchman self does not know how to stand down. It keeps scanning rooms that are no longer dangerous. It keeps absorbing pain that is no longer yours to carry. It keeps performing calm, performing strength, performing the endless, exhausting generosity of a person who gives and gives and gives, because some ancient part of them still believes that giving is the price of being allowed to stay. This is the self that must die, not you, never you, the watchman, the mask, the performance. That must die so that something truer than survival can finally be born. I want you to understand something about death because we have been taught to fear the word. And fear is exactly what keeps so many people trapped in a life that is technically alive but is not, in any honest sense, lived every great transformation the human soul has ever undergone, has worn the mask of an ending first. The seed does not become a tree while remaining a seed. Something in the seed must break open, must cease to exist in its old form before the roots can reach for water and the stem can reach for light. Nature does not sentimentalize this process. It does not mourn the seed. It trusts the breaking. We are far less trusting than nature because we are the only creatures who can witness our own dissolving while it happens. A seed does not feel itself crack, but you feel every fracture. You feel the identity you built with such effort, such cleverness, such desperate ingenuity come apart thread by thread. And because you can feel it, you call it suffering. You call it falling apart. You call it, in your darkest nights, failing. I am here to tell you it is none of those things. It is the most honest work a human being can do. There is an old wisdom, older than any single thinker, older than any single tradition, carried in nearly every culture that has ever tried to make sense of a human life, that says a person cannot become whole without first descending, not ascending, descending, down into the parts of themselves they were taught to abandon, down into the grief that was never allowed a room of its own, down into the anger that was never safe to feel, the fear that was never safe to name, the small child who learned to disappear, because disappearing was safer than being seen and rejected. This descent is not punishment. It is not a sign that something has gone wrong with you. It is, in fact, a sign that something has finally gone right. Because only a psyche strong enough, only a soul ready enough is invited into this kind of dismantling. The people who never descend are not the fortunate ones. They are the ones who never had to. And you who have felt the floor of your identity give way beneath you, you are being asked to do the deepest work a human life offers. So when the old self dies, do not rush to console yourself with easy language. Do not rush to heal in the sanitized Instagram sense of the word, where healing means returning quickly to comfort. Let the dying be a dying. Grieve the watchman, grieve the mask. It served you. It is allowed a funeral, but do not, I beg you, mistake its death for your own. Now, the empath, let us speak plainly about this word, because it has been softened into something almost decorative, a personality trait you might list beside your star sign. But the trauma-born empath is not decorative. The trauma-born empath is a survivor of an early war, and their empathy is not a gift that fell from the sky into their lap. It is a scar that learned to see in the dark. Understand this carefully, because it changes everything about how you relate to your own sensitivity. You did not become perceptive because you were born special. You became perceptive because you had to. Somewhere in your early life, reading the emotional temperature of a room was not a party trick. It was a survival skill with real consequences for getting it wrong. You learned your mother's silences the way a sailor learns the sky before a storm. You learned your father's footsteps the way a soldier learns which sounds mean danger. This is not romantic. This is not mystical. This was necessary, and it cost you something enormous. It cost you the luxury of innocence, the luxury of simply existing in a room without monitoring it. And yet, and yet, here is the strange alchemy that trauma performs when a person survives it with enough consciousness to look back and understand what happened to them. The very capacity that was forged in fear becomes, later, a capacity for a depth of understanding that untraumatized people rarely develop. The nervous system that learned to read danger can, once it is safe again, learn to read truth. The eyes that learn to watch for a parent's anger can, once healed, watch for a friend's unspoken sorrow, a stranger's hidden loneliness, a room full of people performing fine when no one in it is fine at all. This is the rare strength I promised you at the beginning of this speech, not the strength of never having been hurt, not the strength of an armored heart that nothing can penetrate, a far rarer strength, the strength of a heart that was broken open and chose, against every reasonable instinct toward bitterness, to stay open, to keep feeling, to keep caring, not because it never learned pain, but because it learned pain so thoroughly that it refuses to inflict it carelessly on anyone else. There is no strength in this world quite like a person who has every reason to be cold and instead chose warmth, every reason to withdraw and instead chose presence, every reason to stop trusting entirely and instead learned, slowly, carefully, with hard-won discernment, who to trust and how much, which is a far more sophisticated skill than trusting no one at all. But I must warn you, because I would be doing you a disservice if I only told you the beautiful half of this truth. The empath forged in trauma carries a particular danger, and if that danger is not understood and worked with consciously, it will keep the watchman self alive long after it should have been buried. The danger is this: A person who learned to survive by managing everyone else's feelings will often continue managing everyone else's feelings long after it stops being necessary, and will call this management love. They will pour themselves into relationships that take and take, and they will not notice the emptying, because emptying is what they have always known love to feel like. They will feel guilty resting. They will feel guilty saying no. They will feel a strange, nameless anxiety in any room where no one needs anything from them, because a room where no one needs you is, to the watchman's self, a room where you might not be safe, because your safety was always tied to your usefulness. This is the shadow side of the empath's gift, and I use that word shadow with great deliberateness. Everything we push away, everything we refuse to look at directly in ourselves, does not disappear. It goes underground, it waits, and it shapes our lives from the dark exactly because we refuse to bring it into the light. The trauma-born empath's shadow is not cruelty, as it might be for someone else. Their shadow is self-erasure disguised as generosity. Their shadow is boundarylessness disguised as compassion. Their shadow whispers that their worth is measured entirely by how much pain they can absorb from other people, and that the moment they stop absorbing, they will be abandoned, exactly as some part of them was abandoned once before. I tell you this not to frighten you, but to arm you, because the rare strength I am describing tonight is not available to the empath who never looks at this shadow. It is only available, only fully, powerfully available to the one who turns and faces it, who says finally to that old frightened watchman self, I see you. I understand why you built these walls, these habits, these compulsions to please and manage and absorb. You were trying to keep a child safe, and that child is safe now. You can rest. This is what it means for the old self to die well, rather than simply to collapse. It means turning toward the very thing you spent a lifetime managing and refusing to look at, your own unmet pain, and finally giving it the witness it always deserved. Let me tell you what happens on the other side of this descent, because I do not want you to think this speech ends in the dark. It does not. It ends as all true transformations end, in a light that is more real than any light you knew before, because you have earned the right to stand in it with your eyes open. When a person survives this death, the death of the performing self, the managing self, the self built entirely around keeping everyone else comfortable, what emerges is not a smaller person. It is not a person who has learned to care less, to feel less, to protect themselves by shrinking. What emerges, if the descent is done with honesty, is a person of extraordinary integration, a person who feels deeply and boundaries wisely, a person who can sit with another human being's grief without drowning in it, because they have already sat with their own. A person whose compassion is no longer a compulsion but a choice, offered freely withdrawn when necessary, never again confused with self-abandonment. This is what I mean by a rare strength, not the strength of the untouched, the strength of the integrated. A person who has met their own darkness and did not turn away from it, and therefore is no longer afraid of darkness in anyone else. Think about what that means for a moment. Think about how few people in this world can sit across from someone in real anguish and not flinch, not offer a hollow platitude, not rush to fix what cannot yet be fixed, but simply stay. The trauma-born empath who has done their descending work becomes exactly this kind of presence, a rare, steady, unshakable kind of company for other human beings in their darkest hours, because they have already walked that road themselves, alone in the dark, and they know the way, and they know that the way exists, and that alone is a gift that most of humanity cannot offer. You were not broken so that you could stay broken. You were broken open so that something larger than the frightened child could eventually live inside you. That is not poetry. That is the literal architecture of psychological transformation, observed again and again in human beings who did the work of turning toward themselves instead of endlessly away. Now I want to speak to the part of you that is afraid this transformation is not for you, that is afraid you are too far gone, too old in your patterns, too exhausted by the years of performing to believe that a truer self is still available to you. I want to tell you something about the psyche that very few people are ever told plainly enough to believe it. The self you are searching for is not somewhere ahead of you, waiting to be built through more effort, more achievement, more self-improvement projects stacked one on top of the other like bricks in a wall that never quite becomes a house. The self you are searching for already exists. It has existed the entire time, underneath the watchman, underneath the performance, underneath every mask you were ever forced to wear to survive rooms that were not safe for the truth of you. You are not constructing a new person tonight, you are excavating one. And excavation, if you have ever watched it done properly, is not violent. It is careful, it is patient. It brushes away, layer by layer, everything that is not the thing itself, until what was always there is finally visible. This is why the death of the old self, however painful, is not a loss in the way we fear losses to be. It is a clearing. Every mask that falls away is not a piece of you disappearing. It is a piece of the covering disappearing, so that more of the true structure underneath can finally be seen by you and eventually by everyone around you who has been waiting, without knowing it, for you to stop performing and start simply being. There is an old figure who appears again and again across the stories human beings have told themselves for thousands of years, in every culture, on every continent, long before any of these cultures had contact with one another. The figure of the healer who is themselves wounded. Not the healer who arrives whole and untouched to fix the broken. The healer who is broken, and through the very work of tending their own wound, becomes capable of tending the wounds of others in a way no untouched person ever could. I do not raise this figure as a myth to admire from a distance. I raise it because it is quite literally the shape of the life so many of you are living right now, whether you have named it or not. You did not ask to become the one who understands pain so intimately. You did not apply for the position of the person everyone comes to when their world is falling apart. And yet here you are, again and again, the one who knows what to say when someone is drowning, because you have drowned. The one who does not flinch at another person's darkest confession, because you have confessed those same things to your own reflection in the silence of your worst nights. This is not a coincidence, and it is not a curse, though it may have felt like both at different points in your life. It is the particular shape that strength takes when it is forged through suffering rather than granted by circumstance. The wounded healer does not pretend the wound never happened. They do not hide it beneath a performance of having always been fine. They let the wound become the very thing that qualifies them to sit with someone else's pain without flinching, without rushing to close the conversation, without needing the other person's suffering to resolve quickly so that their own discomfort can end. But hear me clearly on this point, because it is where so many wounded healers lose themselves entirely. You cannot pour from a wound that has never been tended. You can pour from a wound that has been faced, understood, and integrated. That is an entirely different act. One is self-sacrifice dressed up as service, and it will hollow you out over years until there is nothing left to give, and you do not even understand where you went. The other is wisdom offered from a place of genuine fullness, and it can sustain both you and everyone you touch for the whole of a lifetime. The difference between these two is the entire difference between the watchman self and the truer self we have been speaking of tonight. One serves in order to be kept safe. The other serves because it has already found safety within itself, and now has something real, something earned, something whole to offer from that place. I want you to notice, too, the particular kind of loneliness that so often accompanies this journey, because if I do not name it, you may mistake it for a sign that something has gone wrong, when in truth it is simply the natural terrain of the path you are walking. As the old self dies, some relationships will not survive the death with you. This is one of the hardest truths of this entire transformation, and I will not soften it, because you deserve honesty more than you deserve comfort tonight. The people who loved the performing version of you, the one who always said yes, the one who always managed their feelings for them, the one who made herself small and agreeable and endlessly available. Some of those people will not know what to do with the truer. more boundaried version of you that is emerging. They will call it a change for the worse. They will say you have become distant, difficult, different, as though difference were automatically a betrayal. And in a sense, they are right. You have changed. But what has actually happened is not that you became someone new. It is that you finally stopped performing someone you were never truly meant to be. This loss is real, and it is allowed to hurt. But do not let the fear of this particular loneliness convince you to climb back into the old skin, however familiar it was, however much easier it might feel in the short term to simply resume the performance and keep the peace. A peace that requires your self erasure was never peace. It was a ceasefire, and ceasefires, however long they last, always eventually break. And on the other side of this loneliness, and I want you to hold on to this because it is true, new relationships will find you. Relationships built not on your usefulness, not on your endless capacity to absorb and manage and give, but on the simple, radical premise of two whole people choosing each other freely. These relationships will feel unfamiliar, at first almost suspiciously easy, because your nervous system has spent a lifetime associating love with effort, with vigilance, with earning your place at the table. It will take time to trust a love that does not require you to perform for it, but that love exists and it is waiting, and it is far more durable than anything you built out of fear. I want to talk now about grief, because no honest speech about this transformation can skip over it, and I refuse to skip over anything difficult tonight. You will grieve the old self, even though it exhausted you, even though it kept you small, even though it cost you your peace and sometimes your health, and sometimes your closest relationships, built as they were on a foundation of you managing everyone else's needs at the expense of your own. You will still grieve it because it is familiar, and the psyche, more than almost anything else, craves the familiar over the unknown, even when the familiar was pain. Let yourself grieve it. Do not rush this. There will be a strange, disorienting morning for the person you used to be. The one who always said yes. The one who always smoothed things over. The one who made themselves easy to be around so that they would never be left. That person kept you alive through years that might have destroyed someone with less resilience. They deserve your gratitude even as you release them. And there will be moments in this in-between space where you do not yet feel like the new, integrated version of yourself, and you no longer have access to the old, familiar performance. And in that gap, that liminal, uncomfortable middle place, you may feel like nothing at all, like you are not a person so much as a question mark walking around in human form. I promise you, and I do not make promises lightly, this middle place is not a place you will live in forever. It is a threshold, not a home. Every human being who has ever undergone genuine transformation has had to stand for a while in a space that felt like nowhere, belonging to no version of themselves, neither the old self nor the new. This is not a sign that the process has failed. It is, in fact, the most reliable sign that the process is working exactly as it should. Let me speak now directly to the strength that waits for you on the other side, because I promised you this speech would arrive there, and I intend to keep that promise. The rare strength of the trauma-born empath who has done their descending, who has faced their shadow, who has grieved the watchman self and let it finally rest. This strength shows itself in ways the world rarely celebrates loudly, but that matter more than almost anything else a human being can offer another. It shows itself in the way you can now say no without drowning in guilt, because you finally understand that your worth was never conditional on your usefulness to other people. It shows itself in the way you can sit beside someone's pain without needing to fix it, rescue it, or absorb it as your own, because you have learned the difference between compassion and self-erasure, a difference most people never learn in an entire lifetime. It shows itself in the way you can feel your own emotions fully, without apology, without performing calm for an audience that never actually needed you to be calm. They needed you to be honest, and for years you gave them calm instead, because honest felt too dangerous. It shows itself in the way you can walk into a room and read it accurately, read the tension, the unspoken grief, the mask someone else is wearing, and instead of rushing to manage it the way you once had to, you can simply notice it and choose freely whether and how to respond. It shows itself in your relationships, which slowly stop being places where you disappear in service of someone else's comfort and start becoming places where two whole people meet rather than one whole person and one exhausted performance. And it shows itself perhaps most quietly and most powerfully in the moments when you catch yourself extending to yourself the same fierce, unconditional compassion you have spent your entire life extending to everyone else. That moment when the empathy you built to survive other people's pain finally turns inward, finally includes you. That is not a small moment. That is the entire transformation, arriving all at once, in a single act of self-regard that the old watchman self would never have believed was safe to attempt. I want you to understand that this strength is not the absence of sensitivity. It is not becoming hardened or distant or immune to the world's suffering. That would be a false victory, trading one kind of self-abandonment for another, simply dressed in the language of boundaries instead of the language of service. No, the rare strength I am describing is a sensitivity that has been tempered. Think of how a blade is made. It is not made strong by avoiding the fire. It is made strong by passing through the fire again and again, and then being cooled deliberately with just as much care as it was heated. A blade that has never known fire is soft and unreliable. A blade that stayed too long in the fire is destroyed. But a blade tempered correctly, heated and cooled and heated again, becomes something that can hold an edge no untested metal could ever hold. This is what has happened to you. If you are the person I believe you are, sitting here tonight, recognizing every word of this speech as something you have lived rather than something you are simply hearing for the first time. You have been through the fire, perhaps more than once, perhaps far more than was fair, far more than any child or any young person should have had to endure. But the fire did not only burn you. If you let it, if you are willing to keep doing this work of turning toward yourself instead of away, the fire is also tempering you into a strength that a person who was never tested simply does not possess and cannot fake, and will spend their whole life admiring in people like you without ever quite understanding where it comes from. I want to close by speaking about purpose, because a strength like this one is never meant to be hoarded. It is not a private trophy to admire alone in the dark. It is meant to be lived, offered, and shared, carefully, with boundaries, with wisdom, but shared nonetheless. The world is full of people who are hurting in silence, performing fine, wearing their own watchman's selves like armor they cannot remove, because no one ever showed them it was safe to take it off. And the person who has done this work, who has let their old self die, who has descended into their own shadow and returned with something truer, that person becomes, whether they seek the role or not, a kind of guide for others, standing at the edge of their own transformation. Not because you have all the answers, not because your healing is finished. It is not, it is never finished. That is not how this work operates. There is no arrival, only a deeper and deeper capacity to meet your own life honestly. But because you know in your bones, in a way no textbook can teach, and no unearned confidence can fake, what it costs to survive, and what it costs to transform, and what waits for the people brave enough to let the old self go. That knowledge is not decoration, it is medicine, and this world tonight needs your medicine more than it needs one more person who never had to break in order to become whole. So let the old self die. Let the watchman finally rest. Grieve it if you must. You have earned the right to grieve every mask that ever kept you alive. But do not stay in the grave with it. Do not mistake the ending of a performance for the ending of your life. You were not born to manage every room you enter. You were not born to disappear so that everyone around you could feel more comfortable. You were not born to carry the weight of every unspoken feeling in every relationship you have ever had. You were born, as every human being is born, to become fully, unapologetically, courageously yourself. And for you, because of everything you survived, because of everything that was asked of you far too early and far too often, that self carries a depth a perception, and a capacity for genuine compassion that very few people on this earth will ever develop, because very few people on this earth have paid the price you paid to earn it. That price was not fair. I will not stand here and tell you it was fair, or that it happened for some tidy reason designed to build your character. Some things that happen to children should never happen, and no philosophy should be used to excuse them. But what you do with what happened, that is yours. That has always been yours. And what I see standing here speaking to you is a room full of people who took an unfair beginning and are, right now, in this very moment, choosing to turn it into an extraordinary strength. The old self is dying. Let it. Something truer is being born, and it has been waiting a very long time to finally, fully arrive. And when it does arrive, and it will, perhaps not tomorrow, perhaps not even this year, but it will, you will recognize it not by some sudden transformation into a stranger, but by a quiet, settling sense that you have finally come home to a self you always were, underneath everything the world asked you to become instead. You will feel it in the small moments most of all, in the ease of a boundary spoken without apology, in the stillness of a room you no longer feel compelled to manage, in the strange, unfamiliar comfort of being loved for exactly who you are, rather than for how well you disappear. Carry that image with you when the descent feels unbearable, when the grief for the old self grows heavy, when the in-between place feels like it will never end. You are not lost, you are becoming, and what is being built in you, brick by hard-won brick, out of every wound you did not deserve, and every scar you have carried with more grace than anyone will ever fully know. What is being built in you is not fragile. It is not temporary. It is a strength that will outlast every storm that tried to break you, because it was forged inside the very storms that tried. Let the old self die. Let it die with your gratitude, and let it die with your blessing, and then rise, not as the person you were told to be, but as the person you were always quietly becoming. Thank you.